And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. With the budget process nearly complete, Governor Cuomo and top lawmakers are hopeful that they might actually meet that April 1st deadline for a change, although talk of early passage is rapidly fading. However, it will not all be smooth sailing once the budget is out of the way. Lawmakers have plenty left to tackle, including, of course, redistricting reform, which is an issue that's become even more complicated thanks to allegations of a potential undercount in New York City by the Census Bureau. Here to share some of their insight into the happenings in Albany and beyond, our insiders are here. Bob Bellafiore works with the National Heritage Academies. He also served as a press secretary for Governor Pataki. Across the table, we have Bruce Jory. He worked as a senior advisor to 2 Democratic governors. He's now teaching political science at UAlbany, and he works at Corning Place Consultants. Thanks very much for joining me, both of you.
Thanks for having me.
So that budget, it's I don't think it's going to be early at this point. We are seeing some passage of bills today, but and Dean Skelos insists, he still thinks it's possible, but that health care bill hasn't been printed yet. And is it possible early? Really?
Well, it really depends on how fast the printing presses can go, because if they get it on a desk by midnight tonight, they get today, then tomorrow, and they can start voting on it Tuesday, Wednesday. That would be Thursday.
Well, they'll have messages from the governor.
Yeah. Right. So I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be early. I mean, could be an hour early. It could be passed by 11 p.m. on the last day of the fiscal year. But no, I think it'll be done by April 1st. Absolutely.
Okay.
And the right way to go about it is to get it done on time, so there's no lag, and not push yourself so you make mistakes by trying to get an early budget. An early budget by 24 hours is of really no governmental significance. But credit to them if they get an on-time budget. That's the important thing.
Well, I mean, what happened to early budget or an on-time budget isn't important. It's getting a good budget that's important. And now all of a sudden we're on like the fast track for on-time budget.
Well, go ahead. No, I'll defer.
No. Do you want to shoot it out, or
no,
all right? No. Okay, good.
Look, for years and years, the state budget process and coming out of Albany has been defined in the public's mind as dysfunctional, chaotic, and a circus. And what the governor has done by masterfully managing this process has been to take all 3 of those things off the table. So, no, I think it's important for all of them in the process to be able to say, we got a budget on time. I don't think people care about early, but just not late and not dysfunctional and not crazy and not really bad late and all that other sort of circus atmosphere that has surrounded so many other late budgets over the last 10 or 15
and the predicates for the budget are there from the governor's perspective and where the public was. They didn't want tax increases. They wanted the structural deficit attended to, and they wanted it done in a way that it reduced not just this year's structural deficit, but took a huge whack out of next year's, and this budget appears to have done all 3 things.
Well, and also, first of all, there may very well yet be some circus-like antics, because we're hearing about a Capitol sleepover tomorrow by some protesters. So if they occupy the Capitol, that it's not going to derail the process unless they storm the chambers, which I don't think that they're going to do, because then the police would get involved. But they might sleep in the hallways, and that's, circus-ish.
Hey, it's the people's building. If they want to sleep in it, that should be fine.
Right,
but you're right, Liz. That's not going to derail the passage of the bills and the resolution of an on-time budget.
Okay, so is this huge win for Governor Cuomo? I mean, that's how it's being portrayed. You started down that path a little bit, Bob. So.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I think what you've seen over the last couple of months by the governor is the perfect leveraging of perception and reality. Right? The perception being he came into office with the reputation of a guy who really knew how Albany worked. He used to work it for his father. So that reputation of real savvy about how Albany works. Also a reputation as the guy who understood the twin incentives in Albany of reward and revenge. And I think everybody in their mind thinks, well, if I work with the governor, it's going to be good for me. And if I don't, it's going to be bad for me, and I never know when. So that's the perception, plus sky-high poll ratings. The reality is he's used the threat of imposing his budget, either doing his whole budget as an emergency appropriation or a shutdown in the extenders as a way to compel the legislature that, look, you really you don't get any benefit by extending this after April 1st. In fact, it gets worse for you.
when the Republican consultant is that kind to the Democratic governor,
There's
I don't
nothing you
have
can
to.
say.
There's
You're
nothing
just
I
not
should
going to
say.
follow it all.
Summary judgment.
Well, okay, fine. Let me just ask you this
Yeah.
then. There was a story in the New York Times this morning that suggested that Shelley Silver has greatly diminished in the Cuomo era, in part, and I think because his waiting game strategy, which is his signature move, if you will, is no longer possible simply because of what Bob suggests, is that if you can't wait out the clock anymore, because then you have to eat whatever it is that the governor gives you.
I think it's way too soon to write someone's, if not their obituary, the story of their diminution. There's a rhythm and a flow to these things. First off, you had to cut a huge structural budget deficit, so you were going to have cuts no matter what. That's one. Two, the Republicans took back the Senate and functionally tucked in behind the governor and supported him because of their alliance on property tax cap, but also opposing the millionaire's tax or the surcharge, or whatever you want to call it. And a no new taxes pledge. So once that two versus one lineup was in place, not to mention the extender authority and the language authority a governor willing to use that authority can bring to the table, you were going to have this. But having said that, Shelley Silver had a rough budget Pataki's first year or two. Governor Pataki largely got what he wanted, drove the shape of government.
That's true.
It didn't hold Shelley down forever. One of the interesting things about this, and the other thing is Shelley is not at cross purposes with his conference. His conference was willing to back him on these initiatives, so it's not like he has an angry, ornery conference. On the other hand, Governor Cuomo is pointing a way towards great popularity, according to the public opinion polls, for a centrist-oriented Democratic administration. And over time, you may see the Democrats in the Assembly grow closer to that. But I think it's way too early to write Shelley down or out or off or anything else.
In terms of the session, it's like the fourth inning, and the speaker's got like 5 innings to go. There are a lot of important issues that have been pushed after budget, like rent control. They could still talk about a property tax cap. The Med-Mal stuff could still come back, and the one thing that the speaker did get off the table in the budget was this cap on pain and suffering. So, which is really, a philosophically important issue to him. Some would say a financially important issue to him.
Some might say.
So, there are plenty of fights to go, and people have written off Shelley Silver too early. He is a master at knowing exactly when to fight and when to pull back to fight another day.
And I think long term, the real issue that is going to come to the fore, that New York Times editorial the other day that compared how the budget cuts for education affected the upstate district in Ilion, New York, versus the more well-to-do suburban district in Syosset. At some point, advocates for upstate schools and children are going to enter the fray. Now, because of the nature of the way the Senate Republicans operate, the Senate Republicans from upstate tend to cede the school issue to the suburban Republicans in return for downstate.
Yeah, but now the prison situation is in play, and that's an upstate issue.
So if there's a public reaction against the impact of these cuts, it's like on education, it's likely to come more upstate. It will be interesting to see if that leads to a grassroots, or whether the governor's predicate is correct, that there was enough, in effect, wiggle room on administrative costs that they could make these cuts.
No,
but I think the upstate school districts will have a much tougher time not cutting muscle and bone than the suburban districts.
And then you will have a political reality to face, and the political reality bleeds over into next year. If, in fact, these headlines that we're starting to see with schools laying off teachers and the pain that is felt from this budget becomes a reality, maybe the voters then subsequently think, well, wait a minute, this isn't really what we wanted. Maybe they didn't want centrist. Maybe they didn't want not in my backyard. I mean, whatever it is that they wanted, next year they have an opportunity to go to the polls and vote. Of course, now the district lines are going to be all different, which brings us in just to the tail end of this segment here on redistricting briefly.
Yes.
I mean, do you believe that the census numbers, I don't know to what degree you guys have taken a look at them, are good? Either of you.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But there's possibly no. Oh no, it was not 19 million two. It's 18 million nine.
It was more of a conceptual question, Bob.
Conceptually, I have no clue.
There were two things I spread in. One, 40%. of New York's population are now people of color,
Right.
statewide. It is not just an urban phenomena. It is now into small towns and suburbs. That's one. Second, there's a whole new growth corridor from north of Westchester through Saratoga. I've given it a name, the kind of Hudson River, the kind of Hudson River growth corridor, and that grew 5.5% versus a state population that only grew 2.1%. Capital District grew quite large. So you're seeing a shift in updates population from west losing to gaining in the east, and that could be interesting down the road.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, and you're off the hook now, Bob. You don't have to say anything about redistricting. But I want to thank you very much. I'm sure you'll both be back and have something to say, I'm sure. Bob
Thank you very
Eleftheriou,
much.
thank you. Bruce Jory, thank you very much.